Hello and welcome to today's Islandora webinar. This month we are going to be providing a how-to guide for Islandora, and we'll be focusing on some of the basic functionality of Islandora. We are going to be recording this webinar, so we'll be sending out a link to that recording later on today. So just a quick introduction. My name is Erin Tripp. I'm a business development manager at discoverygarden, and I've been a staff librarian at discoverygarden since 2011. I deliver training at events worldwide and through online webinars. And previous to this position, I was also a project manager at discoverygarden. So I worked on actually over 40 digital curation and digital repository projects in that time. So today's webinar, we're going to be doing a very quick overview of Islandora. We're also going to be talking about ingest methods. In that, we'll be talking about the structure of an object in Islandora. We'll also be talking about where you edit metadata. In addition to that, we'll talk about search tools and also metadata display, and also applying restrictions. So on to the first bit. Let's talk a little bit about Islandora for anyone who is new to the community. You may not be aware of all of what is included in Islandora. In essence, it is a stack of open source software, and it's primarily made up of three core components, and they are Drupal, Apache Solr, and Fedora Commons. And the stack also includes a lot of utility components and dependencies as well. We don't have the time to get into all of them, but just as a point of summary, it is a large open source software stack. It includes many applications. In essence, folks that have built Islandora and the community members that actively develop on Islandora, they really are experts in integrating third-party tools and applications. Because Islandora is a stack, it is the integration of existing tools. So let's talk a little bit about the core components individually. So first we'll talk about Drupal. So Drupal, many of you have probably heard about Drupal, but it is the leading open source content management system worldwide. It has over 30,000 user contributed modules from over 100,000 developers. So when we talk about open source software, community is really important. Active community members are vital to the success and sustainability of the project overall. It means that more people are vested in the project and seeing it through. So in Islandora, we use Drupal as the presentation layer. It means that's how we create a website and expose it to the internet. And we also use Drupal for collaboration. It has a terrific framework for users, roles, and permissions. And we use that in workflow activities. And it really does integrate in with a lot of other functionality in Islandora. Also, it's worth noting that some people see Islandora as middleware. It can be described in essence as a group of Drupal modules that help us build repositories on top of Fedora Commons. So Drupal allows us to create new modules and also create user interfaces for configuring different aspects of the stack. So the next one is Apache Solr. Apache Solr is used for discovery. So Solr, it's very powerful, it's very flexible, very configurable, and it's used on some of the most heavily trafficked websites and applications worldwide. Its key features are full text searching, search faceting and filtering. It's highly scalable and fault tolerant, and it provides near real-time indexing. For example, if we ingest an asset into Islandora, it's going to be indexed almost immediately and searchable probably 30 seconds after it's ingested. The final core component is Fedora Commons. It's where we store and preserve all of our content. So Fedora Commons is an open source software project that's been around for over a decade. It is purpose-built for data preservation and long-term data accessibility. And the key features are auditing and fixity checks, RDF XML support. We're able to scale Fedora Commons to millions of objects. And we've actually had some recent developments in scalability that I won't get into, but some very interesting developments. It also has support for virtually any file type, and the key here is that if you store your data in Fedora Commons, it's built for interoperability. It means that you can export your data or migrate your data without any kind of proprietary format. So it's going to be in open formats, and it can be stored elsewhere. So there's no barrier to moving your data or managing your data. So those three core components, they make up the open source digital repository framework. And we like to call it a framework because it really is lots of components working together. And so organizations all over the world are using Islandora as a framework to build repositories. They are in some instances customized to meet specific needs. In other instances, they are uncustomized because the standard stack is very usable out of the box. And people are scaling these repositories into the millions of objects, and we are able to make these large repositories perform. So it means that we have quick sites that are meeting user expectations. So the next bit, just a very quick overview of where Discovery Garden fits into the picture. So Discovery Garden, the company that I work for and the one that Adam works for, we're a service provider, an Islandora service provider. And we see our role as removing barriers to using Islandora, to using open source software. We were launched in 2010, and we're a partner in the Islandora Foundation. The foundation is a nonprofit entity that fosters the Islandora code. Since we launched, we have contributed over 90% of the Islandora code base. We've written it at Discovery Garden on behalf of our customers. We have a lot of services, pretty much any service that you can imagine that could be related to an Islandora repository, we provide. And more details on our services are available on our website. It's important for us to note that we do have a philosophy. And the reason why we work in open source software is that we believe it's important to invest in people and ideas instead of software licenses. All right, so now on to the good stuff. That was a quick introduction to Islandora for those of you who might be new to the stack. Next, we're going to get into a how-to guide for Islandora. I'm just going to have a quick drink of water, one moment. Okay, I'm back. So first, actually in this section of the webinar, we're going to be moving in between the slide deck and a Sandbox site that I'll be working on. Some of the topics we're going to be getting into, they will be just reviewed at a high level. Others will be very detailed demonstrations. So we'll do our best to fit as much as possible into the webinar. Okay. So the first bit is permissions. How do we handle users, roles, and permissions in Islandora? I mentioned just briefly in the Drupal overview that it really does have a terrific collaboration framework for users, roles, and permissions. You can essentially assign permissions based on a role. A role is just a group of users. And so when you create new user accounts, they can be assigned a role, and then that role will provide the permission framework for that user. When we talk about permissions, it is permissions are given through Drupal. Restrictions are not enabled through Drupal. Restrictions are enabled through a different framework called XACML, and we'll be talking about that later on in the presentation. So first, I will be just exiting out of the slide deck to go to our Sandbox. Because really, when we're talking about digital repositories, I'll just go to home page. Most often, the first thing that we do is we log in if we're an authenticated user. So right now I'm on our Discovery Garden on-demand demo sandbox, and I'm already logged in. You can see up here that there is a menu with a black background. That there is the admin menu. If I were not logged in, you would not see that menu. So to see the permissions framework, I always go to the People menu. It's at the top of the site, and I click People. You can see here I only have 2 users. That would not be typical in a production level repository. You'd probably have lots and lots of users. And then I'm just going to click on the Permissions tab here. So this is a great view. For those of you who have not explored this interface, it is worthwhile exploring. Really, this is going to give you a look at the roles you have on your site. So the default are anonymous, so unauthenticated, authenticated, and administrator. But lots of organizations customize these roles. So you could have a role for faculty, a role for students, a role for library staff, a role for library administrator or archive administrator, so on and so forth. So these are very configurable. You can see here at the top right-hand corner, there is a permissions button that we're on right now, and there's also a roles button. So we can go there and create new roles, or also edit existing roles. To go back to the permissions page, though, it is a really terrific way to get a snapshot of who can do what on your repository website. I often will go right down to the Islandora section, and it gives us a quick snapshot of what certain users can and can't do. For example, the first permission here is the viewing of repository objects. I have this site configured so that anonymous, authenticated, and admin users can all view repository objects. This is probably the most common configuration, although we come across repository sites that they are completely locked down. They're meant to be dark archives. And so folks or unauthenticated users can see just the About page, other descriptive pages, but they can't actually see repository content. Okay. So I would encourage folks to browse the permissions interface at their leisure. It not only will give you an idea of how you can structure users, roles, and permissions on your repository site, but it will also give you a snapshot of what Islandora can do and the tools available. All right. So next up is structure. This is another fairly basic concept, but it's an important one. In Islandora, we borrow some terminology from the Fedora Commons community. And in essence, we call everything an object. A collection is an object. A PDF, an image, a video, they're all objects. And objects have components. They have data streams. So an example of a data stream would be descriptive metadata. It is stored as a data stream. Also, a preservation master file. It would be stored as a data stream. So on the next slide, I'll just show you really quickly. This is a quick image of the data streams view of an image object in Islandora. So you can see up here, it says bug tray. That's just the title of the image. You can see here on the right-hand side, I've clicked the Manage tab. That's what we're viewing right now. And then the Data Streams button is highlighted as well. So this is how we can see what components make up our digital objects. There are a number of these data streams. Some of the IDs you probably won't recognize, and that's okay. The ones worth noting is OBJ, that stands for object, and that is the preservation master file that I've ingested. The other one worth noting would be the descriptive metadata data streams. Mods is the one that was entered on ingest for this particular object, and the mods was mapped automatically to Dublin Core. And then below here, below the OBJ, you can notice a couple of image derivatives, and those are ingested, or rather generated automatically on ingest. So if you wanted to navigate to the data streams view of any object, I'll show you how. So I just navigated back to my home page by clicking the home button in the top left-hand corner. Then I'm going to browse the repository. And I can click on any collection or any object in a collection to see the data streams. So why don't we take a look at the basic image collection. And this is just to show that collections are objects, and so are the objects within them, the children of those collections. So I'm on the basic image collection. This is just a demonstrative collection on my Sandbox. And I'm going to click the Manage tab. It's worth noting the Manage tab is only going to be visible to administrative users based on how I have my Sandbox configured. And once I click Manage, I have a number of options here available to me, and I'm going to click Data Streams. So you can see this collection, it has far fewer data streams than the image object that we already saw. And that's because a collection is, in essence, a semantic object. It has some descriptive metadata, and it also has relationships. It has children. So these data streams are designed to provide a structure for descriptive metadata and to affiliate children objects to the collection. The collection policy, if you're curious, it just says what types of content can be ingested into this collection. So it can say, it can really say any type of content can be ingested into this collection, or it could say that this collection can only have children of a certain content model. And all of that is configurable if you go to the collection button. So you can configure your collection policy. We're not going to get into that today. It's a bit of a rabbit hole. So we'll just go back to the data streams interface. I'll exit out of this Manage tab, and then I'll visit one of our images in this collection. I'll also click the Manage tab, and then to its data stream. And here is exactly what we saw on the slide. An image is a fairly complex object in a repository. It has a number of image derivatives, including technical metadata, a thumbnail, a compressed JPEG, and a compressed JP2. It has the preservation file, which I ingested. It has two descriptive metadata data streams. And then this one up top, the relsext. The relsext contains fairly vital information, such as a persistent identifier, the content model of this object, and also any other relationships. And this is all expressed in RDF XML. All right. So now that we've gone over users' roles and permissions and the basic structure of data in a repository, I want to give you guys an overview of ingest methods. So we do have quite a few of them, and we won't demonstrate all of them live, but let's do a quick overview. So the first ingest method that people typically try when they're going on a Sandbox or trying on a VM that's installed on a local machine is the individual ingest. Excuse me. It's a very simple process. It involves probably 5 or 6 clicks. And essentially, you navigate to a collection, you click the Manage tab, and then you click Add an object to this collection. A sort of wizard will come up, and it will guide you through the insertion of descriptive metadata through an XML form, and it will also ask you to upload a file. Because we are ingesting over the web, so that means through the Drupal interface, it means that there is a 2 GB file limit. That's just for, it's a PHP timeout. It's a general limitation when you are trying to ingest content over the web. So the next type of ingest is a batch ingest. And we do have 2 main types of batch ingest that can be conducted over the web or through the Drupal interface. The most common is called the zip file importer. And it's just a really simple module where you can zip up types of content. So you could have a zip of JPEGs, a zip of TIFFs, a zip of MP4s, and they have to be separated by file type. And you can also have XML files that describe your MP4s or JP2s or TIFFs, And as long as those files have the same label, like image01.tiff and image01.xml, if you zip those together and ingest, it will allow you to batch create objects in the repository. So it's a really simple module that will allow you to create objects in the repository in small batches. Because we are undertaking this action over the web through the Drupal interface, we do continue to have that 2 GB file limit. The other type of batch ingest method in the repository, there are 4 specific batch citation uploaders. So you can upload a text file of PubMed IDs or DOIs, also EndNote XML. So these are specifically for scholarly publications with unique identifiers. The third type of ingest is typically done on the command line or directly into Fedora Commons. And it's done by writing and testing a script. So this would be done by a software engineer or software developer. We would recommend scripted ingests or scripted object management for batches that are quite large. So if we were to ingest, let's say, 20,000 images, it's highly likely that we would recommend a scripted method. So for an example, we'll go to our trusty Sandbox here. And we'll do just an individual ingest to get started. So I'll just navigate to the basic image collection again. And I'm going to ingest a JPEG file. In Islandora, we call a JPEG a basic image. We also call a TIFF or a JP2 a large image. So the process does take a couple of clicks. First, we navigate to the collection. We click the Manage tab. And then this link here, add an object to a collection. It's going to ask me to select a content model. And also it's going to ask me for a mark XML file. This is a module I can enable or disable. Today I don't have a mark XML file for ingest, so I'm going to click Next and skip it. So now it opens up an XML form so that we can insert descriptive metadata. I know that this is a mods form, but the average user isn't going to know that it's mods. So you can see on the form, there are a few different types of fields. So there are text areas, there are drop-down fields, like type of resource, and there are also, here they are. There are also fields where you can add multiple values, and that's indicated by the green plus button here. You can note also that any field that is mandatory is going to be denoted by a red asterisk, and you can make any field in a form required. So just for our purposes today, I'll put in sample image, and I'll put in my name as creator. I'm going to leave the rest of the fields blank. Note that anything with a drop-down menu, it will autofill whatever is selected there. And I'm going to click Next. We can go in and edit the metadata. The same form will pop up if we want to add more values later. So the next is the opportunity to add a file for upload. And I have a JPEG on my desktop that I will browse to. And it's called Empire State Building. I'll open that and then upload. And then I'll ingest. So on this interface, you can note that it will give you a maximum file size. It will also tell you which file types are accepted. And while that wheel is spinning, what's happening is the system is generating derivatives. So in this instance, it's generating a thumbnail, a compressed JPEG, a technical metadata. It's also mapping that mods metadata to Dublin Core. And I mean, I only entered a name and a title, so pretty quick. And it's also writing the rels-ext statement. So it's giving this a persistent identifier. It's telling the system what content model it has, and also which relationships it has. So what collection is its parent. So to take a look, this is the average Islandora view. The title is always up top. After an ingest, you have this trusty green message that tells you things went okay. Then below, you have the details section, which is just your record. And if we want to take a closer look at this image, we can click the Manage tab and then click the Data Streams button. And you can see, although we just uploaded a JPEG and entered a title and a name value, the system really did the rest for us. It wrote the relsext data stream, it mapped to Dublin Core, and it generated a couple of derivatives. So all of that happened automatically on ingest. Now, there are, I'll go through one of the batch methods for ingest as well. And we really get to it in the same way. We always start by navigating to where we want to ingest the content, and then we click the Manage tab. What is different in this scenario, the batch scenario, is that I click the Collection button, and that's where the Batch Import Objects link is. So that's a little bit different. I'll click Batch Import Objects, and I'll select from this list of batch import modules. Because I'm going to be uploading a zip file, I'm going to select the zip file importer. And I'll click Next. So the file that I'm going to upload includes some JPEGs. And so I'll navigate to that file now. It's the basic image sample.zip, and I'll upload. I'll also define a namespace. Namespace is a way that you can provide subsets of content in your repository. So in the setup of your repository, you can define a number of namespaces. You could have a namespace per collection, or in a shared service scenario, you could have a namespace per member or per institution that's participating in the repository. And I'll click Import. So the same thing is happening now. Instead of the derivative generation process happening on just one item, on one image, it's now happening in a batch on 2 images. So in the zip file, and I probably should show you what's in my zip file. Let's take a closer look. So you can see here highlighted, I have the basic image sample. And there are 4 files here. There's image01.jpg and image01.xml. These 2 files are going to be ingested together, and they're going to be stored as data streams on one object. The same goes for image 02.jpg and image 02.xml. And so it says that we've had a successful batch ingest. I can click on the queue, and it gives me the persistent identifiers of the objects that I've ingested, and I can click on them to check them out. So the other type of batch ingest, as I mentioned, is for scholarly publications. So you can do a, you could, let's say, I'll just go to PubMed here. I previously did a search for lobster, and I'll navigate to the correct interface. So I'll toggle in between PubMed and the Islandora Sandbox for a moment here. I'll navigate to a collection that where I can ingest citations or scholarly publications. There's a citations collection that I'll select here. I'll click Manage. I'll click Collection again, and then Batch Import Objects. So we're back to this selection again. Last time we selected zip file importer. This time we're going to select PubMed importer and click Next. So here we have two options. For any of the batch citation ingest modules, we have the option to rather list the identifiers in a comma-separated list here in this bottom section, or we can create a text file that includes comma-separated IDs as well. So both work. I do have a text file on my desktop that I'll show you. It is called PubMed ID version 2. And you can see here it's just two IDs and there is a comma separating the two. I'll save that. So let's upload this. Open and upload. And import. So essentially these modules, the citation batch ingest modules, they are harvesting the data based on the identifiers provided. And I click on the queue and I can see that two objects have been ingested, and I can click on the ID to navigate to that object. So those are the three main batch ingest or ingest methods that are available through the Drupal interface. Like I mentioned, if for large batches or even for very large files that are above the 2 GB limit, we will create scripts and ingest directly into Fedora Commons. This process is very well documented. We have a lot of developers that do this every day. And I'm just going to navigate here to the GitHub documentation. It's maintained by Dan Aiken. He's a developer on our staff. And for anyone who's interested in this link, I'll actually put it into the chat window. For those of you who are interested in learning a bit more about ingesting content programmatically. All right, so I guess before we get into discovery settings, I did want to show you two more things on the Sandbox, and they are the editing of metadata and also the display of a record. So I'm going to navigate back to one of the images that we just ingested, and I'm going to click the Manage tab. I'm going to go back to the data streams section. This is going to be hopefully getting a bit more familiar. And you can see under the operations column, there is an edit option. So there is an edit option available on the mods data stream because I have an XML form associated to that data stream. So if I click edit, the mods form will open up and I can make an edit to the record. And I'll just add the word edit to the title. And I'll go to the bottom and I'll update. So you can see here the title is now including the value edit. One other thing that's worth noting, that anytime we edit a data stream, the data stream is versioned. So I edited the mods data stream. You can see there are two versions of it now. The Dublin core data stream is updated anytime the mods data stream is updated. So it also has a version 2 as well. If we click on the version, it will show us when the new version was created. It'll give us an option to delete or revert back to a previous version. There is a batch metadata editing module. It's called xQuery. We won't be demonstrating that today, but just for general knowledge, we do have this module. You do require a knowledge of XPath and xQuery to use it, so some technical skills required, but it does come in handy if you are looking to make large batch edits. So I have a question. Someone's saying they're curious as to when a batch becomes large. Is it 500, 5,000, 10,000? that question, it really depends on the user. Some folks will do small batch ingests using the zip file importer or the citation batch ingests that I just shown. And it all depends on whether they have staff that can take on these batch ingests. So they have time as a resource to put toward that ingest, and they can do it in small batches over time. If people are in a big rush and they need to have the batch ingest done of 10,000 or 20,000 objects, then sometimes the scripted process is better. It really does depend on the skills and the resources available on the project. But from our perspective, we do see most organizations migrating from an existing repository or application, and often the batches are quite large, in the tens of thousands, sometimes much, much higher. So we would say that for migrations, the scripted process is probably the most common, but depending on resources available, some organizations will take the small batch approach and use the modules available. We have another question, and it asks, can we have a collection level record that pre-populates the mod's record for items in that collection? That is not available in the standard functionality, although it could be customized to do that. I'm just going to scroll through the comment section to make sure I haven't missed any others. All right, good to go. The other thing I wanted to go over very briefly, because I know that we're getting short on time, is how to customize the display of your record. So this is assuming that you've ingested content, it has descriptive metadata, and now you just want to display it. So I'll exit out of here, and I'm going to click on the Islandora menu at the top of the site. And then I'll click on Metadata Display. And you can see here that you can have three options. We can choose not to display any metadata. We can choose to display Dublin core metadata, or we can choose to select this Islandora Solr metadata option. And this is the one that's configurable. So it means you can select the fields that you want to display in your record. So for the most part, people are using the Islandora Solr metadata display because it's flexible, it's configurable. So if your site is configured to display the default, which is Dublin core, you would simply select Islandora Solr metadata and save the configuration. And then you would click on Configure to go and do a bit more. The standard install includes these sample profiles for display. And you can note here that the display is done on a content model level. So you can display a record for images that is different than a record for a PDF or a book. Please note that we're unable to provide record display on a collection level. So if you have audio spread throughout 50 different collections, you will need to accommodate audio record display in one profile, and it will be used in all 50 collections. This is a fairly atomistic approach, having a different record display for each content model. You could certainly delete all of these and have one display for all content models. So before we click on any of the individual profiles here, I'm just going to go to the general configuration. And I'm going to click Omit Empty Values. That's an important one. And you can also omit duplicate values and save configuration. And now I'll go into one of the content model profiles. I'll select audio just for kicks. And you can see here that you can affiliate a profile to a content model. So I could add content models to this profile. Be really easy. I can add a PDF content model, and then I could remove it if I wanted to. The next important section is display fields. So you can see this is quite a robust profile, including more than a dozen fields. But it's important to note that not every record is going to have values for all of these fields. So we're probably looking to accommodate a couple of metadata profiles in general. So the record may only display 5 values, although there are over a dozen fields configured here, because we've already selected that empty values will be omitted from display. And the process of adding a field is really quite easy. It's the next very important section in this profile. We can just start typing a field label or a field name, and it will autocomplete on fields that are indexed in Solr. So we'll start typing, let's see, rights. And here we have DC rights. So we can select DC rights, click add, and then save. Once we've clicked save, an edit link will appear on the right, and we can give it a natural language label like rights or copyright. And we can save that. We can also drag and drop these fields. So I can choose to have this rights field display under type of resource, and then I can save that change as well. So I know that's a quick overview. If you have questions, we have some very detailed documentation on how to use the Islandora Solr metadata display application. So if you have questions about that, let us know, and we can send you some documentation and answer your questions. Okay. So we only have a little bit of time left, and I do want to leave an opportunity for questions at the end. So I'm going to be going over discovery settings and also restrictions very quickly so that we can have the time for questions. So discovery settings. We've made some terrific advancements in discovery settings in general since we moved from Drupal 6 to Drupal 7. I remember when I first started using Islandora, there was really no easy way to configure advanced search or facets. I would have to ask a developer or someone with more technical skills than I have to make those changes for me. In today's Islandora, I don't need to do that. I can navigate to a location in the Drupal interface, and I can make those changes myself. The interface is very similar to the Solr metadata display interface that we just looked at. So there are modules for, there is a Solr settings interface, I should say, and they can be configured quite easily. And these features are also organized in blocks. So we can display the advanced search block or the basic search block or facet blocks on our site very easily. So I'll go back to our sample site, and I'll show you how to get to this interface. I typically will start at the Islandora menu at the top, and then I'll click on Solr Index, and then on Solr Settings. So Solr Settings is where most of the discovery configuration will happen. Up top, you can select the default display profiles. So typically, folks will have search results in a list format. However, grid is also popular. Those are the two most popular. You can have an option to have your search results available in CSV and RSS. And then here below is where you actually provide the fields that you want to display or search on. So default display settings, that's code. That's secret code for search results. So this section, we define which fields should display in our search results. Also note that we are going to omit empty values. So we could have a large number of fields configured here, and only fields that have values will display in search results. Adding another item or another field is quite easy. You simply start typing, and it will provide you a list of fields that are indexed in Solr. So I will select, I'll select title, just start typing title. And I have a number of options. I can select Dublin Core, I can select MADS for people or other entities, or I can select mods, title info title, which is down here at the bottom. And I select the MS extension because it stands for string. So it's going to, it's not going to break the value on a space character or something like that. And I'll click add. And I can give it a natural language label, call it title. Otherwise, it's going to display as title info title. And I can move it up to the top by dragging and dropping the field. It's very important in this section to have this checkbox checked. It will limit the results to only the fields listed above. And you can also define the number of results that return per page. Studies have shown that people often don't go beyond the first page of results. So different organizations will want to configure this differently. And I'll just save my changes. All right. So all of the other discovery settings are configured the exact same way. And the title of the sections are a bit more clear than the first one. So sort settings, it's the fields that you can sort on. Note here that we often, well, there is a limitation to sort. We can only sort on fields that do not repeat. So often we'll select a machine-generated value here. It's called FGS. It's a Fedora-generated field value. So if we want to sort A to Z, we would select FGS label. It's a long bit here, but we'll select FGS label. So that's a bit of a trick. Only people who have done it in the past would know to do that. So I'll configure that to say title. Other fields that are really good for sorting could be dates. You really can choose whichever you like, but title and dates are probably the most common. And I'll save that change. Facets are the filters that display on the side of search results, so they'll help you narrow your search results further. You can see here that we have subject, date, 2 dates displayed or configured for facets on this site. Another good facet would probably be the name of a person. So I'll just start typing name part because I know that's what we use on a lot of our forms. You can see here that there are corporate entries, but there are also personal, and they should be further down. Okay. So I'll select name part personal, and I'll configure that to just say name. And I'll save that change. The last block left is advanced search, and it is configured the exact same way as the previous. So you can choose to do full text, OCR search and advanced search, search by title, search by person. The only important thing to remember for the advanced search, which may be different from the other configurations, is that in advanced search, you select the MT extension. So it stands for text, and it means that it will break the value on a space character so that you can search for part of a value, which is valuable in the advanced search, in advanced searches in general. So I see we have a question. There's just a question whether we can provide a copy of the PowerPoint, and we will be emailing everyone who's registered a copy of the PowerPoint and also the recording to the webinar after this session. All right, back to the slide deck. So we're now on our last bit, and it's all about applying restrictions or embargoes to content. It's worth noting, as I briefly mentioned before, that in Islandora, we provide permissions through Drupal. But we restrict access through something called XACML. It's spelled XACML, and it is a policy framework that comes from Fedora Commons. So we're leveraging restriction framework from Fedora Commons. There are a couple of options when we're providing restrictions. And so we can do it on a collection level and have it apply to all of the children. We can apply it on a collection level and have it only apply to new children, so newly ingested content. We can also do it on the individual object level, so embargo a PDF. Or we can also embargo on a data stream level. So we can embargo the OBJ data stream, the preservation master, but leave the metadata to be exposed. So people can know to find the object, just not see the preservation master. So I'll go into our sandbox again, just to give you a quick idea of where this type of functionality lives. So I'll just go to this home button so that we're starting right from the home page again. And then I'll navigate to an object that's familiar to us. So let's navigate to an object in the basic image collection that we've just ingested. So this Cathedral in the Evening image is something we ingested today. And we can click on the Manage tab. And when we're setting an embargo or a restriction, we click on the Object Policy button. And this is where we have the opportunity to place management or viewing restrictions or restrict part of an object. So here, DSID stands for Data Stream ID, and MIME types are types of data streams. So if you check one of the boxes or all of the boxes, you can see a couple of things. You can see the users and roles that are available through Drupal. So you can restrict content based on a particular user or a group of users, and that's a role. The most common type of restriction is typically viewing restrictions. And so if we had a dark collection that should be available only to administrators, we would be able to select just administrative users or the administrator role and then save that restriction. That way, unauthenticated, so anonymous users, or other authenticated users that don't have administrative permissions, they would not be able to see the collection or the individual object. So it is worth giving it a try to set some restrictions on a collection, on an individual object, then logging out and seeing if you can navigate to it. Anytime an object is restricted, it should be omitted from search and browse. So it means that you should not be able to find an object if it has viewing restrictions enabled. So playing with this functionality, it can take some it can take a half an hour, have admin credentials, log in, give it a try, log out, try to find it. Then do it again, maybe do a different type of restriction, maybe on a collection, and have it apply to its children. And I can show you an example of that. Then log out again, test. So the collection level restriction, you just navigate to the collection instead of an individual object. You click Manage, and it's the same process. You're looking for the Object Policy button. And here you can see which objects the policy should apply to. So in most instances, you want to apply it to all children of the collection. So I know that was quite quick. We do have one question on restrictions. Is it possible to restrict the editing of objects? That is actually a permission through the Drupal interface. That's a great question. So when we think about editing, that's a permission that we give to users. So if we wanted to do that, instead of navigating to the Manage tab on a collection or an individual asset, we would instead navigate to People and then Permissions and scroll way down. And under the Islandora section, there is the Edit Metadata permission, and we could give authenticated users the ability to edit metadata and then save the changes. And that's how that would be done. So we did cover a lot of ground. I know that we have about 5 minutes left. This is an opportunity for folks to ask questions. It can be related to the content that we've covered, or it can be unrelated. The choice is yours. I see a few people typing. One moment. I had a question come to me about the restrictions on the data stream level, and I'll just navigate back to that interface very quickly to show how that works. So the question is, do you have to know a lot about the data streams? Like for instance, what if a user is new to Islandora and they don't know data stream IDs? The good thing is there is a type ahead or an autocomplete on these data stream or MIME type selections. So you can start typing and it should match on things that exist. So you can put in O and the matches that come up are collection policy and policy. If that's not what you're looking for, you can try a couple of other things. You could try M for mods. You could try DC. You could try under MIME type XML. Or if you really don't know what you're looking for, just click or just put in an asterisk, and all of the options will display for you to select from. That's a good question. Okay, a couple of other questions. Can we set up a sandbox to use until we're comfortable using Islandora? Yes, you can, and I'll show you a couple of options. One moment. Okay, so there are a couple of options for folks that want to try Islandora. Just give it a go. In my opinion, the most successful projects always have a testing period. So even if in your heart you selected Islandora and you know you're going to implement it, I still suggest that you do a testing period. It's the only way really to understand what the application does and does not do in its standard or out-of-the-box form. So the first option would be to go to the Islandora Foundation website and download a virtual machine. It's really easy to install. It's this section here. So it's islandora.ca/downloads, and it's under the heading Virtual Machine Image. So you can download and install that and give it a go on your computer. It's worth noting, though, if you don't have a very powerful computer, it may not work well. So another option would be to use an online sandbox. We have an online sandbox at sandbox.discoverygarden.ca. The user credentials are right here on the front page. So the username is admin, the password is Islandora. And if you want to log in, the login link is just in the footer. So you can give some of the things that we've done today a try on the sandbox. The one thing worth noting is that the sandbox is cleaned up every night. So if you ingest something today, it will not be there tomorrow. Okay, another question. So is there the ability to batch edit metadata, for example, to clean up data to conform to a controlled vocabulary? Could you show it? There is the ability to batch edit metadata. I mentioned it very briefly before. It's called the xQuery module, and it's actually outside of my realm of expertise. It does take some technical skills to use, so knowledge of XPath and xQuery are needed. I do have a video of someone using the module that I'd be happy to send out to folks if they're interested in learning a bit more about it. We also have documentation on the module as well. So we can include those links in the email follow-up that we send later on this afternoon. Okay, another question. And I know we've reached the top of the hour. For those of you who have to go, thank you very much for joining us. We will be sending out an email in the next hour or two. For those of you who can stay on, we'll just answer a couple more questions. So the next question, can one object be associated with multiple collections? For example, could a paper written by faculty members from different departments appear in both departments' collections? Or could a student-faculty collaboration appear in both student and faculty collections? Yes, absolutely. And I'll show you how very briefly. Let me find my mouse. So in a repository, there is no need for duplication of assets because you can have relationships with multiple collections. So I will go back to an object. Okay, I'll just go back to this collection. We'll kind of start from scratch. So this is the basic image collection. I'm going to click the Manage tab and also the Collection button. This is where we have collection management features. So we didn't get into this today because we didn't have a whole lot of time. But essentially the two relevant menus here are Share Members and Migrate Members. If I click on Share Members, I can essentially share objects in this collection, the basic image collection, with other collections. It means that the objects will have relationships to two or more collections. Alternatively, if we wanted to migrate members, we would be removing objects from this collection and putting them in a different collection. So these are two very important tools for the management of data. We find that migrate members is often used if you have to do an ingest of content, but you don't know exactly where it's going to live. You don't know which collection it should be in. You just know that you need to get it into the repository in the short term and you can curate it later. So you could have a temporary collection that is restricted to unauthenticated users. Once the content is curated, you could move it to a public collection. All right. So the last question is just about whether there will be a recording of this webinar available. Yes, there will. We are recording right now, and we'll be sending out a YouTube link to the recording later on this afternoon. So there are no more questions. I'd like to thank you very much for joining. We will be sending out information in the next couple of hours. And please, if you have any questions at all, don't hesitate to contact us. So on behalf of myself and Adam Smith, thank you so much and have a good day. Take care.